So you tell me if this makes any sense to you. And let's say that I have a very, very stable situation. I have the stable base rules. I mean, this and the math more or less means that it's a grind.
Right, exactly, right?
And then I say that, okay, this is the basic of how things are going to go down, and you are not going to win the grind down. So if you let it be a grind down, you're going to lose.
Right.
Now, is a bunch of things you can do when you roll and when you defend yourself to bring some risk in and say, okay, I'm going to try something a little more difficult, a little more expensive. I'm going to invest some of that energy instead of defending myself into offense to try to break this circle. Because if I trade blows with the thing, that is going to win. That's more or less what I wanted to go.
But let's maintain that. I think it's a good idea. And so the contingency that I'm talking about actually makes it meaner. It makes it meaner and better because we have then this idea. First of all, if we go back to the initial rolls and whatever it is, whether it's the application of an ability on the monster's part or the application of something I do that's more risky as my stated defense or whatever it is that is going to introduce more of a range of the points coming in over my defense. More often than not, more points will come in on me than I have defense. We know that. Yes. The question is how many? And if it is an entirely predictable amount, that's the enemy right there.
Yeah.
That's the enemy, is the predictability of that amount coming in over the top. So whatever way we get, and I'm saying instead of introducing a new mechanic, go to the mechanics you have and say how many of those mechanics are stabilizing that amount. Many of those are good, like your 3d6, fantastic. Don't lose that, right? Fantastic. No, but you worked hard for that, right? You worked really hard for that. So, was it you keep the top two or you keep the top three? You keep the top three, right? But you may be rolling more than three depending on the right. But you worked really hard for that system. We're not going to do it. We're not going to mess with that. But there are a lot of things that you mentioned during and before the roll that alter things a little.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Good. Let's take a look at those and make sure that they're not too weak. And we have the perfect model to avoid, right? All those fucking feats in 4th edition.
Yeah.
Most of which, not only are there
5,000
right, not only are there thousands of them, but most of them only provide the smallest little situational thing. Right. There are a few. The one that I always go for is the one that gives you all that extra initiative, because that's awesome. Right? There are a few that are really, really important, really good. But most of them are just these itsy-bitsy things. So we want to avoid that situation. We want, if anybody, brings in an ability or anything that modifies the basic rolls, we want that modification to be significant. Right.
Yes.
That modification needs to be a serious issue. So that's where you're going to get the varying points coming in over the top that are decision dependent and are also exciting fictionally.
Yeah.
Right? Does that help?
Yes, it does, because that's one of the lessons for us. I like 4th edition, but 4th edition is the very example of that mathematics being so stable that a +1 is incredibly important. And when a +1 is incredibly important, it's kind of boring.
Right.
And the other thing is that there is two things that I wanted to mention is that to exemplify, I am not contrary to going back and tweaking.
Right.
For example, one issue we found out in play, if we let everything happen after the player spent energy, a lot of time you will not notice the creatures because they do a thing, the player explains how he avoids the thing, and nothing
happens.
That's
right.
Yes. So basically what we did was design, and that means that sometimes you have an effect that happens before the player gets to. An example was like, for example, the werewolf that jumps on you and is going to jump on you and try to bite your face off. You can stop the bite your face, but you can't stop the jump.
No, you've still got a werewolf sitting on you, and you're probably on your back. Right, exactly.
Yes, yeah. That's how it works.
Yeah.
We work
that actually can be very, very solid without further mechanics, as long as it is established that the ability is going to do a thing. I think you're good. You're good. You know.
And that's the other element is that I mentioned we have 5. Basically, we don't have any plus. I mean, you have the dice. Right. There is no numbers to add or stuff like that.
Very important. If you're going to vary the number of dice and the size of the dice, the last thing you want is any pluses. Right.
Yes.
Exactly. So you've already got it.
And so because we have a game where the circle, to use your terminology, is not small, but the advantage is that the handle time is also not small, and so we don't want also other time
one or the other. Correct. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
The other thing is that we have this basically which is scale up and scale down, which is very simple. You can decrease the dice, increase the dice. In the fiction, when you don't have any other rule, but you want to change something in the scene, in the fiction, you can use these rules. And the other rule is that gain or lose. I mean, you can gain 1 dice, you add it to the pool. You lose 1 dice, you take 1 dice from the pool, and you take it away before you roll. Right. That's all the rules, more or less.
Sure, that's great. And I get that. It looks like we're going into the roll very nicely. Right.
And there is another thing, and this is a thing that is very random, and that is the rules about spotting. And it's a bit like when you have to beat a difficulty. I mean, many abilities have this thing that says, okay, if you roll at least, if you can spot, if you can see at least 7 on a single dice,
I saw that in the text.
Random, then something happens, and this may be really significant. They change a lot. I mean, so I rolled a 16, rolling like 12 with a 4, a 4, and a 4, and nothing really cool happens. But I roll a 12 with 1 6, 1 1, and 1 5, and that 6 may trigger something really, significant. Right. And that's how we inserted a lot. Let's call it bounce.
Right. There's some good stuff to that. I see all that, but again. With this many working parts, I want to focus on the one that has the most consequences for whether I end up with a spear through me or not.
Okay.
Right? I want to focus on the one thing which looks at my damage clocks.
Yes.
And I say, I would prefer to make it through this fight without a spear sticking all the way through me.
Perfect.
Right?
Perfect.
That's what I want.
Yes.
So all the things you're talking about are pretty awesome and not really, I think, problematic. In fact, most of them are working with the system. I think you may be pushing the edges of how much information you're demanding and extracting. I think you've kind of hit the full limit of how much we're going to do.
The point
that,
I said. Right. This is a very the rules are very conductive of a lot of information, and they may have gone overboard with.
So I think you're at least at the limit, and let's not put anything extra in that. But I'll take it as a given.
Okay.
Give it. Maybe, if anything, strip it. But I'm saying I'm not even recommending that right now. Right.
No.
So then we are. What I want though is let's just take all of that as settled. Now here it is coming in over the top of my defense.
Yes.
And then I say, well, there may have been random things about those other things, but I'm interested in the random thing about this moment.
Yes.
And at this moment, the question is, how secure do I feel as a player? I look at my existing energy bank and I go, okay, all right. And how many times am I going to look at my energy bank and say, oh, shit? And at the moment, what you said earlier worried me a little bit. You said, when it gets low. But that brings us back to the grind, doesn't it?
Yes.
So we have with that in mind, let's just keep some thought on that.
It's all, I mean, it all converges, and you can understand how kind of I am about all these moving parts I have to handle. And the thing is that once, even when you have it, clean and functioning, and you say, okay, this is all fine, and then you have to build because you have to create content for it.
Right.
There is also the risk that something may not work perfectly with what. So I want to make sure this part, not reliable but function.
Right.
One thing you mentioned when you said when something that gets me over the top, and this is a very, very difficult topic. Actually, you touched it because the question is, okay, so the monster has a success of 7, and so I have to decide how much do I reduce it. So it's the 3 different increments of success, but I don't know what happens. So one element of risk could be information. What do I give to the player? Maybe he says, okay, I'm going to risk the strike, and I tell you, oops, because with 3 successes, you have been run through and you're dead.
That's the end of you. So, right. Well, again, though, with as far as I can tell, your interests and your designs in play, you're not really looking for a game that says, regardless of your strategy, you lose. Right?
Yeah.
You don't want to play chess and have somebody roll a die and say, oh, by the way, I rolled a 6, so I win.
Yes, right? Perfectly.
So we don't want that. And I completely get that. And the trouble is that so many role-playing games do have that feature associated with dice that it has led people to be dice-phobic.
Yes.
Right? So that's what I want to tell you is that I'm talking about randomness that serves your purposes, not randomness that removes them. Okay?
Because I think 2 games that influenced me, both games came out after I started working on this, I think. One of them is sure, the other not. But for example, Savage World is really the kind of game that makes you die phobic because you have exploding roads, and at some point, oops, I was fine, and a moment later, oops.
Right.
And there is no skill, no.
Right. It's just, this is the argument is, and this is the Rollmaster argument, well, it could have happened.
It's a fine little game to do something, but then you see that stuff and you say, okay, I can play it for one night, but it's
right.
And the other game that I think it goes a bit over the other direction. In control of the destiny of your character, you are. I still really like it, and I really like how it's designed, but it's Blades in the Dark. Blades in the Dark, you have
and actually, I tend to agree with you about this. I will also name in this side of the spectrum, I'll also put Fate there too.
Yes, of course. You need to be scared when you play this. And that doesn't work. If I decide when I die, that to me, when I got hurt, it's too much.
Right.
What
we are looking for is a system. We have a slight time lag here, so I feel like I'm interrupting you by accident.
No, so don't worry. Okay. If you interrupt me,
well, make sure you get to finish a point that you want to make, because it's hard for me to know. If we are looking at the events of play, and if we were there, we would have seen all of the randomness factoring into it. But looking back on it, it seems inevitable.
Yes.
And in a satisfying way. And we can say, see where I made that decision, see how things happened, and looking back on it, it seems inevitable, but in the moment by moment, it was not. And so, and it's a very powerful sensation. And it is really one of the key factors of a satisfying system. And so and so you can concentrate on moment to moment and being strategic or whatever you want in it. And whatever it turns out, even if I do end up with a spear through me, and I can say, I didn't want that to happen, but given the way it went, I can see how it went this way. right?
Yes.
And that's different from just rolling a 20 and then it explodes, and then I roll another 20 and then it explodes, and then finally he says you have a spear through you, and you're like, yeah, but that could have been any time. There's nothing that led into that, right? There's no fiction that made that happen. I look back on it and it's not inevitable, it's arbitrary.
Yes.
There's a difference, right?